Loading. You are live.
Excellent.
Just pop on the Facebook page. Check we're streaming. Hello, everybody. If you are watching this and this is live, just checking that it is. Yeah, we are live. I can see us on the Facebook event and see me and see our video second hand, which is kind of odd. Amazing. I can see people coming in. That's great. Welcome, everyone. Fantastic. I'll just have that on the side so I can see if anyone pops in any questions or anything. Cool. Okay. Well, as it's past 2, we may as well get started. So hello, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to this. We're CUFA, the Cambridge University Film Association, if you didn't know already, and we provide equipment rental, workshops, advice, and events to make filmmaking in Cambridge more accessible to anyone who wants to give it a go. And this is our behind the scenes series where we invite famous figures from the film and television industry to come and talk about their work and their careers, such as this one. And today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Philip Shelley, who is a freelance script consultant and the producer of the very prestigious, very exciting Channel 4 Screenwriting Course, submissions for which are currently open. And that's my bit. So Philip, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jasper. Yeah, it's not often that I'm called famous, and I'm not quite sure how accurate that is, but I'll take the compliment. Thank you. So I'm a script consultant. My background is as a script editor and producer in television drama. For the past 12 or so years, I have run my own independent script consultancy, working with writers and with production companies, giving advice on scripts and giving feedback on scripts. And I'm just about to enter the 12th year of running the Channel 4 Screenwriting Course, which is an initiative, set up by myself with the Channel 4 Drama Department in London. And their brief for me is to find 12 new ultra talented screenwriters every year and work with them over 6 months developing a script, and then help them launch their careers and launch themselves into the industry, mainly in TV drama, but also obviously in film. And before that, I was a script editor and producer and worked on quite a few different shows in television drama. So that's me. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. So to kick off with, I thought I'd just ask a bit about the Channel 4 Screenwriting Course, which is obviously, as you were outlining, a really big course that happens annually, going into its 12th year. You guys get thousands of submissions, right? Or like definitely very, very many submissions. And writers who graduated and go on to work, like invariably go on to work in the TV industry. So could you just explain a bit about what it's about, like how do people go about applying, like what the sort of process is, that sort of thing, so people who don't necessarily know about it.
Okay, so as I said, it was an initiative that I actually used to run a similar course when I worked for ITV at Carlton Television, which you may not have heard of, which was one of the ITV companies, a long time ago now. And I ran a new writers course there, and when I was sort of coming to the end of my time at Carlton, and thinking about what I wanted to do next, that was probably the part of my work that I had most enjoyed. So I went to Channel 4 and pitched this idea to them, and the head of drama at the time, Camilla Campbell, who's now an independent producer, commissioned me to run the course. But basically the brief is for me and the course to find 12 really excellent, as diverse as possible writers, none of whom have a TV production credit, so they're all essentially new writers, and work with them over 6 months developing a script. So that's basically how it works. So so now, as I say, we're about to enter the 12th year. So it's about 130 writers have come through the course now, and also there's a script editor training element to the course, in that we have myself and 3 other script editors working on the course. So we each work with 3 writers each, and we also have a shadow script editor working with us. So that's sort of a sort of trainee script editor opportunity, of which there aren't very many in the world of television or film, and it's such an important role in the industry. So generally, the shadow script editors are chosen from the team of readers who read the submission. So we try and get new readers every year. So at the moment, I've got a team of 7 readers who I interviewed a couple of weeks ago, who were waiting for the script entry period to close on October the 1st, and then we get down to the business of reading the scripts, and we have a weekly meeting in which we discuss the scripts. So that's sort of broadly how it works.
Fantastic. And for people watching this who may be interested in submitting, as you said, you don't need a broadcast credit, so it's like open to anyone essentially.
Absolutely, it's open to anyone. You need to not have a broadcast credit, so it's only open to writers who don't have a broadcast credit, who haven't got that experience. Having said that, the level of experience of the writers on the course varies quite hugely, in that we have actually, over the last 2 years, in 2021 and 2020, we had a writer on each of those courses who I think had only written like 1 or maybe 2 completed scripts, and was still at university and submitted their script. And so so one of the writers, who was on the course this year, had just left Cambridge, in fact, and is now doing an MA at SOAS. So she was in the middle of that as she was writing on the course. And then a year ago, we had another writer who was still at university when she submitted her script. So on the one hand, those are sort of the least experienced writers we have on the course. On the other end of the experience scale, we quite often have writers who, for instance, have written a lot for theatre and have a reputation in theatre, and are now sort of becoming interested in screenwriting. So writers can submit screenplays, stage plays, radio plays, any form of dramatic writing, essentially, as their submission script.
Fantastic. Yeah, so that people watching, hearing about previous Cambridge grads coming on, could be you next time if you want to submit something.
That hadn't actually occurred to me till you asked me that question. I suddenly remembered Hannah Shorey-Smith, who's a really talented writer.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, and I was just thinking on that note of like the number of scripts you must have read over the years, over the course of your career, and over the course of running the course. And I think something that I'd be really interested in asking is how over the course of that time do you think writing for film and television has changed? Do you feel that the scripts you read today feel different to the scripts you were reading like 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago? Or do you feel like at core, like, what people are actually writing hasn't changed that much? Or what do you think?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, actually. And that's something I think about a lot, because I feel like I'm in quite a privileged position to have that overview, because I've been doing this a long time, and I'm still reading new writing, and in a lot of ways I'm the first port of call for new writers. And so I do think it's changed hugely, actually. Actually, when I ran the sort of equivalent course at Carlton TV, which was actually in the last century, or the scripts used to be delivered on paper and in brown envelopes. And I remember like the first year, I can't remember exactly how many scripts we got, but it was like 370 envelopes, and we were like blown away and said, "This is amazing and ridiculous that we got so many scripts." Now we get 370 in a day during the submission process. So, and I think, a lot of things have changed, but I think generally the standard has really risen. I think like the overall standard of competence is like really high. we used to, like back in the Carlton days, we used to get quite a few scripts you could like read the first page and think this is either a bit bonkers or incompetent or makes no sense at all, and showed no signs of sort of basic knowledge of how screenwriting worked. That's very, very rare these days, and there is a lot more education in dramatic writing, both in terms of university courses and independent courses, and what you can learn on the internet, and just generally there's a lot more discussion and communication about dramatic writing. So I think there are a lot more people writing screenplays, and the general level of ability is a lot higher than it was, which in a lot of ways makes it harder, because the scripts that are sort of hardest to assess are the ones you read and you think this is really competent and really well written, and I sort of admire the writing, but I'm not grabbed by it. And those are the scripts you feel guilty about rejecting, the ones that are sort of thoroughly competent but not exciting or compelling. And so I think that's one thing, both in terms of the quantity and the quality. There's just been a huge increase. In terms of what people are writing, I think things have changed hugely as well, in that there is so much more diversity in terms of what is being written and writers that are putting their work forward. And I don't just mean ethnic diversity, I mean sort of regional diversity, gender diversity, sexual politics. So that's really exciting, actually. Reading so much work that feels like they're from voices that you wouldn't have read 10 or 15 years ago. So that's exciting. And I think in terms of the format, we used to get a lot of feature film scripts and long stage plays, and they were the majority. And now I'd say we get more like 30-minute TV pilots and 60-minute TV pilots. But in last year's submission, we were struck by how many 30-minute pilots we got and how many really outstanding 30-minute pilots we got. And like 5 or 10 years ago, I would have said you need to write like at least a one-hour episode or a feature film to show off your ability. But I don't think that's true anymore. I think there are so many good half-hour episode shows on TV, and a lot of writers can really sort of pack a lot into that. And in the last few years, we've given writers on the course the option of either writing a 1-hour pilot script or a 30-minute pilot script on the course. So that's changed a lot as well. And I think the general consensus of the readers from 2021 was that they found it harder with like full-length feature film scripts, or maybe just because it takes so much longer so much more time to read the script, but also because often you didn't sort of really get into the story till page 30, because the premise of the story only gradually became clear. Anyway, it's hard to generalize, but a lot has changed, and that's one of the fascinating things about doing this process year after year, is seeing how things change and how people respond to what they're watching as well and what they're enjoying.
There's loads of fascinating stuff to pick up on there, and that really nicely seeks into what I wanted to talk about next, about how the film and television industry itself has changed. And from what you were saying there, like it's changed a lot. Like I think the sort of like theme of what you were saying is about how rising sort of education standards with regards to screenwriting has meant there's more screenwriters, which means there's more competition and more variety of what's being written. And you talked there at the end about the resurgence of the half-hour drama, which is something which is really fascinating. Stuff like I May Destroy You and Normal People last year, as you were saying, those are formats that 5 years ago you wouldn't necessarily expect to be commissioned whatsoever. So from your view, do you think that the increase in the number of screenwriters and the change in what screenwriters are offering has itself actually changed the sort of structure of the commissioning goals of the film and television industry?
Yeah, well, it's interesting to know who is leading that change. But yeah, definitely over the course of the time I've been doing the course, it has changed enormously. So like actually even the sort of well, this is like a hugely sort of topical political thing at the moment, is like the future of Channel 4. And obviously that's under discussion at the moment, like for all the wrong reasons. But you know, from my point of view, running the course, it's probably true to say like Channel 4 now is a smaller part of the drama commissioning machine in the UK than it was when I first started the course. I mean, they sort of have relatively the same place in terms of the other broadcasters, but now there are all the streamers, and there are just so, and actually, you know, the profile of the BBC has changed enormously in terms of what they commission. Yeah, but it's mainly the influence of the streamers and the money that Netflix, Amazon, Apple, etc. have brought in, and the fact that they can, you know, everyone's competing for the same talent. So I think, yeah, while Channel 4's place is sort of smaller in terms of the money they have compared to everyone else to commission drama and the amount of drama they commission, which makes it a little hard. I mean, the drama department at Channel 4 are brilliant in the way they respond to the scripts, and they talk to all the writers who've done the course, and they read all the scripts, and they try to think of ways in which they can work with the writers. But the reality is they're never going to commission all 12 writers who've come off the course to write something, because they have so few slots, you know, and a lot of those slots are going to go to people like Jack Thorne or Russell T Davies for very good reasons. But I think generally in the industry, the writers who come off the Channel 4 course now have far more opportunities than the ones who were on the course in 2011, because there is a hunger now and an openness to the work of new writers that there wasn't 10 years ago. And I think that's a lot to do with the fact that just so much more is being commissioned now. And yeah, the Jack Thornes and Russell T Davies of this world are, you know, permanently unavailable, or have, like, you know, they have a huge queue of people waiting to work with them. So the industry has sort of woken up to the fact that, you know, there's some really good writers coming off the course, and generally the writers who come off the course have like a barrage of interest to deal with when they come off the course, which is very exciting for them, but it's also quite overwhelming if they're not used to that, which generally they're not. Yeah, so but to get back to your question more directly, I think the industry has changed hugely, and there are so many more people commissioning drama and comedy, while at the same time the profile of the shows that's being made is very much high end now, and big budget, and often things are, you know, big international co-productions, and in some ways that makes it more difficult for new writers, because there are less sort of, you know, very low budget studio 30-minute based anthology series, for instance. And so, you know, you sort of have to go from sort of being a brand new writer to working on a very big budget show. You know, you have to go from 0 to 60 very quickly often, and actually the bridge to that generally is working in a writer's room, and that's another sort of aspect of the industry that's changed a lot over the last 10 years. And whereas previously writers' way into the industry would have been traditionally through soaps and continuing series, there are obviously far fewer of them now than there were, and so often writers get their first break in a room of 5 or 6 writers, pitching ideas, talking about an idea, and hopefully getting commissioned to write an episode on somebody's series in that way. Although I see today that Waterloo Road has been announced as coming back, which is as a sort of replacement for Holby, which is interesting. It's interesting that they're reviving an old show rather than coming up with a brand new show, but that's a whole other subject, really.
Yeah, and I think you touched on so many interesting things there, and actually a question that I was going to ask later, but I'll skip to now, about like the sort of the tension you sort of tapped in there about the explosion of opportunity for new writers, with the growth of streaming services, Netflix, Apple, Disney Plus, all the smaller streaming services that have exploded, as well, who are just looking for new and original content. And especially what I think is particularly interesting and useful for everyone watching this and for the perspective of my generation, is their almost unprecedented investment in the UK, specifically in the UK film and television industry. And I don't know if people saw, but as yesterday, Netflix bought the Roald Dahl estate. And this was effectively a guarantee that, you know, they're going to be prioritizing so UK set, UK made content for the foreseeable future. So in a way, you could say that if you're someone watching this right now, if you're like a student right now and you want to be a writer, you want to work in film and TV, there's almost never been a better time to get commissioned. But then you also hit on the sort of tension within that because of the international nature of these streamers, and because of like the sheer level of competition, it can be quite intimidating. And perhaps there's something in the idea of those shows that are being commissioned. There's less stuff that's very there's a risk that there'll be fewer things which are sort of, I suppose, like regionally focused or like specifically UK set, or like you culturally identifiably British. I know the main example I'm thinking of is Sex Education, and how Sex Education is a Netflix production. It's identifiably UK based. It's got British actors. It's very much set in Britain, but it's set in a kind of like fusion of 80s American high school and contemporary Britain, and that's very much intentional, but done so to appeal to an international audience. So on that note, like, do you think that the film and television industry is in a healthy place right now in the UK? And do you, from where you're sitting, do you spot any kind of warning signs for the next few years, or anything which, this feels like it could be a problem in the next couple of years, or what?
Yeah, that's a huge question, and it's really difficult to answer because I think it's changing so quickly, and particularly in the last few years, that change has really accelerated. So I think one thing that is really important is that everyone who wants to write and be part of the industry needs to keep watching the industry and see what's happening. I think that's one side of it, although slightly contradictory advice is, I don't think you should write what you think people want. I think you should write what you want to write. But anyway, that's a whole other issue. But yeah, but it is a really interesting time, because so there's a lot of sort of impetus to sort of decentralize away from London, and to have production in particular, more than development, happening outside London, all around the UK, which I think is a really good thing. And when I first started working at Carlton, Carlton had taken over Central TV, which was the Midlands region, and still had quite a few offices and studios in Nottingham and in the Midlands. And at that time, ITV and BBC all had a lot of regional production centres and made far more shows that were distinctively regional or national, you know, when it was Wales, Scotland, Ireland. So while I see the production moving away from London, which is a really positive thing, I think the development of projects and voices from those regions and nations is a bit slower. And but that's, you know, that's always one thing that the Channel 4 drama department say to me, you know, in terms of the diversity of the writers, we want as many writers who are not London voices on the course as possible, you know, writers from all around the UK with different things to say about the regions they live and work in. So that is one thing we try to do. But yeah, and again, like the last year and a half has been really interesting in terms of writers' experience if you don't live in London, and also script editors as well, because no one's been able to travel in the last year and a half, and everything is happening online like this, you know, and on Zoom. things have really changed. And for writers who live a long way out of London, where, you know, in the past they would like try and arrange, you know, several meetings in one day and come to London, and it would cost them a shitload of money because trains are so expensive, and then they'd come to London and they get a call from their agent saying, oh, unfortunately this meeting's cancelled, can you come back tomorrow? And they'd say, no, we can't get back tomorrow because we spent 150 quid on the train. So that's, you know, I think that's been a really positive aspect of the industry, actually, that so much more is taking place online now. So actually, an example of that, on the Channel 4 course in the last couple of years, I mean, the 2021 course took place entirely online, and the only time we met up was to have a picnic in Regent's Park a few weeks ago for the last 2 years of the course, which was great. But it was weird that I only met quite a few of those people for the first time face to face after the whole event. But yeah, one of the things we've done on the course the last couple of years is encourage each group of script editor, shadow script editor, and 3 writers to organize like 1 hour chats, informal chats with people from the industry. And when I talked to everyone on the course about doing that, I was sort of assuming that they'd go for people who had been on the course in the past, who were now doing really well. And a lot of the writers did that, but they also said, oh, can we talk to people like Phoebe Waller-Bridge and Joe Penhall? And I thought, well, yeah, try, but that's being really ambitious. Anyway, so one group, the script editor on the junior script editor on that group got in touch with both those writers, and both of them gave up an hour of their time on Zoom and talked to that group of 3 writers and script editor, and were like really generous and candid and fascinating. And, you know, if it'd been in the real world, that probably wouldn't have happened. So there's a lot more access now, and it will be interesting to see, even when the world opens up again properly, you know, how much of this we retain. And I hope we retain a lot of it, because obviously you lose something, but you gain an awful lot as well, I think, and particularly for writers who don't live in London. Sorry, that was a huge tangent, and I'm not sure I've addressed the thing you were asking about. The dangers for writers. Well, I think I just would go back to what I was saying earlier about the fact that there aren't so many shows that are uniquely regional or national as there were 10 or 15 years ago. There aren't so many low budget shows where writers can cut their teeth. There is a certain snobbery in the industry towards the continuing drama series. So people often say they're brilliant to learn on, you know, shows like Hollyoaks, Doctors, EastEnders, but don't get stuck in them, which is sort of slightly weird and conflicting advice, because they're great forums for storytelling, those shows. But I think, you know, on the one hand, they give producers the assurance that you have worked on something that's been made and you understand the process of developing a script for production and seeing it through. But on the other hand, there's a slight suspicion that if you get stuck on those shows, your sort of imagination is somehow limited because you've been working on those shows for too long, which I don't think is true. But it can be quite hard to make the leap from being solid continuing series writer to originator and creator of shows. And sometimes actually it's easier for the writers of the Channel 4 course who've had no experience at all to go straight into creating and originating their own shows, because there's something sexier and newer about brand new writers than writers who've been working for 3 years on EastEnders, which is wrong, but it's just the way it works.
Interesting. I think there was a lot there that I want to pick up on, and I think talking about the production element there, and also what you said a couple of minutes ago about encouraging writers to write what they want to see as opposed to what they think other people want to see. And just thinking when it comes to student writers, and being at Cambridge, a lot of us write for theatre rather than film or television necessarily. And in doing so, like one of the things we have to contend with is, of course, like practical considerations and limitations and so forth. I think I was just wondering, like in general, when you're working with writers and when you're reviewing scripts that come through the consultancy or through Channel 4, do you ever sort of sit and read a script and go, like, oh, this is really fun. This could never make it to air. Like this is, you can't have, I don't know, a dragon flying through central London, etc., etc., etc. So to what extent would you recommend that writers sort of think about those practical concerns of like budget and casting and location when writing their script, or do you really just say no, just go for it, write whatever you want?
Yeah, generally the latter. It obviously depends on what stage you're at and who you're showing your scripts to. And if you've got to the stage where you are working with a production company and a producer and they're looking at your ideas as ideas that they want to get made, then obviously you need to think about the logistics and the reality of that. But from where I'm sitting, most of what I'm reading are spec scripts, or calling card scripts that writers are going to write and show to the industry, and that will open doors for them. But those scripts probably won't get made. So it's actually like one of the few chances you get in your writing career to just go for it and write what you want, and write something that may be completely impractical in terms of ever getting made, but it shows off your voice and your talents as a writer. So I would really say, don't limit yourself, don't censor yourself, don't think about budget and whether it might get made. Just write the thing you need to write, and whether it's a monologue in one room that can be shot for nothing, or a Game of Thrones epic, you shouldn't matter too much as long as it has integrity and feels like a really powerful articulation of what you want to say. So yeah, generally I would say, yeah, you have to judge the situation, and the further you get into sort of realities of the profession, the more you have to tailor your work to what is realistically going to get greenlit. But at the start, when you're trying to get your foot in the door and attract people, and interest people in your work, then you should just write what you want to write and not worry at all about the budget, etc.
Yeah, that goes really nicely into what I wanted to ask next, and may possibly actually answered it, which is about what key qualities you look for when you're reading scripts. So you just mentioned about articulation of what it is they're trying to say and integrity, and earlier you mentioned about how you sometimes read scripts which are really highly competent but don't necessarily grab you or have like a spark. So what are those key things that yourself and the other script readers look out for when you're reading scripts?
Well, the first thing to say is like every year when we read the scripts and then we have a weekly meeting and discuss the scripts, we never agree about the scripts, which is quite unhelpful. But it just shows you how, I talk a lot to the readers about the fact that it's really helpful if the writers have some sort of Channel 4 sensibility and some awareness of what Channel 4 make. But that changes all the time as well. So that's quite a hard thing to define. But it is subjective, and actually part of the importance of having meetings with the readers and not just having written feedback from them is just to hear their passion for a script. Sometimes they'll write a report of a script and I'll read a bit of the script and think it's not for me, and then I'll get the reader in a room and they'll tell me why the script is brilliant, and I'll think, oh, actually, yeah, I should reconsider that. But for me, the most important thing is that the reader makes some emotional connection with the material and is moved by it, or is made to laugh or think, or is excited by it. And for that to happen, the writer needs to be moved and excited and needs to sort of burn to tell that story. And again, that is the other side of the coin from cynically second guessing what they think the industry wants, which is the thing that everyone who's reading scripts reacts against, is the sort of script that feels cynical and not entirely true to what the writer wants to write, but can make a very competent hour of television. So I would say one of the things that we don't get quite enough of generally, and there are always lots of exceptions to this, is scripts that tackle like really big contemporary political ideas. A lot of the scripts we get feel quite small in scale, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And you can write an absolutely brilliant script that is small in scale and is completely character led. And all scripts should be character led rather than plot led. But there's so many amazing things going on in the world, and so like one of the interesting things we talked about with the scripts that came in for the 2021 course was how many of them are not dealt with or referenced the pandemic. The vast majority chose to ignore it, which was fine. But there were a couple of scripts that made a virtue of it and told stories that were set in the pandemic and said interesting things about sort of the UK or the world's response to the pandemic, but also made a virtue of the limitations of what it meant. So that's an example, and at the moment, obviously there's a huge amount of talk about climate change, and we tend to get a lot of dystopian scripts set in a uncertain, undefined future where everything has gone wrong in the world. And too many of them feel to me like they are the less interesting responses to what's happening in the present because they're set in this fictional future. So that's one of my bugbears, is that we just get a lot of dystopian scripts, and there is nothing wrong per se with dystopian scripts, but it just feels to me like you take a lot of the heat and the relevance out of like the huge potential drama and the high stakes and climate change if you write something where basically it's fictional and we all suspect terrible things are going to happen, and that may not be the most interesting way of attacking a subject like that. Often, not enough people sort of fully tackle head on huge sort of political and social events in the world. But it's very easy for me to say that, and there often are exceptions to that. But I would say, and it goes back to what you were saying about budget and thinking practically. And again, it was, I'd say this is one of the few opportunities where you have to write something that you feel absolutely passionately about and isn't particularly fashionable, maybe, but if you feel it strongly, then we will feel it strongly when we read it, I think.
Yeah, no, that was really interesting, and there was loads of interesting stuff there. I mean, as someone who's written and directed a semi-dystopian film, I can sort of agree with the critique. I can see what you mean. And yeah, really interesting to hear that you don't always get projects which tackle those kind of like big global issues head on. That's really interesting to hear. I think, personally as a politics student, and also for anyone watching who is also studying in the sort of social sciences outside of English literature, that sort of thing. I think that taps on nicely to something we wanted to ask, and something which one of the commenters, Anna also asked about common mistakes you see in first-time TV writers, or mistakes or things, or as you say, so like bugbears, things which come up and you're like, oh, this always frustrates me.
Okay. So I'm not wild about talking about that because it begins to sound like a bit of a whinge, but we'll have a go.
That's fair enough.
So I have just had a little bit of a whinge about dystopian scripts, and it does feel a bit unfair because there are brilliant dystopian scripts and not particularly interesting dystopian scripts. But I think at the heart of that is, what do you want to say, and why are you saying it in that particular context? Are the questions you need to ask yourself. So the other things that I find difficult, and actually this is fresh in my mind because like half an hour before this I started this conversation, I was reading a script that did exactly this. Something that was really well executed in most ways, but in terms of the presentation of the script on the page was full of errors. Just in terms of like, I'm talking about formatting and layout and doing that professionally, and you can tell so easily the writer who has read a lot of scripts and understands how the formatting and the layout works compared to the person who has read very few and is making lots of mistakes. Because there's a reason for that formatting, you know, in the way that it conveys your story. And you need to understand why there are those conventions in screenwriting or playwriting. So that is a bugbear when you read a script and you think, actually, this is the easiest thing to get right in your script. And on page 1, there are 5 mistakes, and that's really discouraging. So a script, I've just read the first 10 pages of it, and the first sentence of the script in the directions was like really awkwardly phrased, and my heart sank as I started reading that script. And actually, it's got a lot better since then. But it's just simple things like that in the presentation. And that's not the most interesting thing I could say, but it's really important, actually. It's sort of disproportionately important. In a situation like this, where there are 8 of us reading the scripts, and we are all reading dozens and dozens of scripts every week, and you become, as a reader, disproportionately sensitive to the way the script is presented and disproportionately pissed off about poor presentation. So that's one thing. And again, the other thing, which I've said already, is don't write something where you're second guessing what you think people want. When I was having a meeting about the scripts that were written on last year's course with Caroline Hollick, the head of drama at Channel 4, and she was talking about her sort of general response to the scripts, one of the things she said, which really struck me, was these aren't necessarily scripts that Channel 4 would make, but these are scripts that these writers would like to see on Channel 4. And I think that's a really good attitude to have. You know, you should write something that you think should be on Channel 4, and not just write what you think, you know, what would Jack Thorne write, you know, and what sort of things does he write about? I should write about something like that. The writers that really shine through are the ones that are saying, this hasn't been tackled on television before and it needs to be talked about, and it's horrific what's happened, and this is the story that I want to tell you that you will know nothing about. That's you know, one aspect. Obviously there are other sorts of scripts that are less thematically challenging but are just brilliantly executed, but it is important they have you know, a strong Channel 4 sensibility as well. One thing I would also say, which comes back to presentation, is if you've written a feature film, we have a page limit of 130 pages, I think it is. I would say to you, if you're a new writer and you're submitting a feature film and it's over 100 pages, you need to ask serious questions about it, because again, people will not want to read a long script because they're reading a lot of scripts. And I think almost without exception, every time I've read a script that is 120 pages that has been sent into my script consultancy, my first question is, or my first comment is, this will be a better script if you cut 20 pages from it. So yeah, ask yourselves those difficult questions, because as readers, our hearts will sink when we get a very long script, and because it's so rare that you read a 120-page feature film screenplay and think every single scene is absolutely necessary to the development of this story. But basically what we're looking for is something that moves us and excites us. It's all very well finding a script interesting or fascinating, but what we all want to feel is a script is emotionally involved with it. And that comes down to the characters and the storytelling, but also the ideas that you're exploring.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ben. There was loads of interesting stuff in there, and especially on the length of scripts and the art of brevity, really, when you're submitting scripts. In the last,
sorry, just to interrupt you, and I think that sort of hit us all afresh this year when we read so many brilliant 30-minute scripts that were more effective than a lot of the 1-hour scripts. And and I don't want to put you off from submitting a 1-hour script or a feature film, because obviously there are very many brilliant examples of them. But as I said earlier, whereas, you know, a few years ago I would have questioned whether you can show off your writing ability to full in a 30-minute script. I think there are so many examples of that now, and writers have risen to that challenge. And I think just the pace and economy of screenwriting has moved on, and it moves on all the time, and you are expected to sort of achieve more in a shorter space of time than you ever were before, and keep the story moving with real pace and tension within a short time frame.
For sure. And on that, for the last going into the last 15 minutes, I was thinking about going back to the questions about the industry, and about how it works, and about how it's changed, and all those sorts of things. And I was thinking with regards to your career, and you were saying how you ran a similar course to the Channel 4 New Writing course at Carlton, and you've worked in a sort of script editing, script reading, script development capacity for 20 years at this point. And I think you've consistently demonstrated this sort of like commitment to new writing and finding new writing. I mean, where does that passion come from? Really?
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting question, and I don't really know the answer to that. I mean, I read a lot, I watch a lot of TV, I always have, and when I think back to like when I was a teenager in my early 20s, and the shows that were formative for me and the impact they made on me, I've just always been obsessed with story, and I actually came to this job relatively late in life. I used to be an actor for 12 years before I got into script development. Wow. And I got into it through writing, and I discovered I was a better script editor than I was a writer. Anyway, so yeah, I've just always loved stories. So I still read a lot of books and watch a huge amount of television, even though most days I'm reading several scripts in a day, or a couple of scripts in a day. And I just think story is fascinating, and I think there are so many amazing stories out there, both fictional and real. And so when I look at the news, and when I look at newspapers, or what's happening in the world, the sort of equivalence and between real stories and fictional stories, and how one becomes, the crossover between the two is absolutely fascinating. So again, just going back to the scripts I've been reading in the last couple of days, I've read a script that was submitted to my script consultancy about an aspect of the Yorkshire Ripper case, which I didn't really know about. And this writer had done a lot of research and had very impressively weaved the research into making a really effective piece of drama. And again, just that process, of turning the facts of a story and research into a dramatic story that works, and what you have to add and what you have to sacrifice in that process. Again, those conversations are really interesting to me, and I think that's true of the industry as a whole. I think you find that the best writers and the best script editors and producers have an endless fascination in story, and you will find that like pretty much every script meeting you have with a writer starts off where you talk about what you've watched on television the night before or the last couple of weeks, and why you loved it or why you hated it, and whether you agree or disagree. There's a debate to be had, and you learn new things all the time. So even I've been doing this a long time, my views change all the time, and I'm learning new stuff all the time. And I think that's one of the things that's fascinating about it. And every year I have a different team of readers, and I learn new stuff from them as well. So yeah, I think it's just the constant thinking about how story works and what stories work and why they work that keeps you going. And I think at the moment, and actually for the last few years, there has been such an explosion of drama, but really great drama and comedy, that it's just a really exciting time to be in the industry. And running the Channel 4 course and seeing the success that most of the writers have to varying degrees when they come off the course is really gratifying as well. And I try and stay in touch with as many of the writers as possible, and talk to them about how things are going. And so there's, as I said, there's like 130 plus writers who've done the course now, and also a lot of script editors who've come through the course. And so there's quite a sort of significant minority of people in the TV and film industry who have been through the course. So yeah, it's always really interesting to see how they getting on, talking to them about what they're doing, sort of both, you know, socially and creatively.
That's really interesting, and it seeks again nicely into what I wanted to ask next about those pathways into the industry and into jobs. Because of course, in your commitment to sort of fostering new writing and running these kind of programs, it's like extending an opportunity that you know, otherwise wouldn't be available. You know, people of like students, people of my generation, you know, people who perhaps want to go into writing film and TV, but don't know where to start. And you know, competitions like this, which are like, you know, can't have a broadcast credit, so it's like perfectly geared towards that kind of demographic. And as you said, you've had students get onto the course before, and talking there about the number of people in the industry who have come through the course. But then of course, unfortunately not everyone can come through the Channel 4 course, and there aren't necessarily very many of these kind of courses available. And it sort of goes back all the way to what we were saying in the beginning about the explosion of writing over the past 20 years and the raising of standards. And you touched on sort of education as well, and like the script generally, you know, higher standards, better formatted, that sort of thing, with the exception of a couple as we touched on. So what kind of general traditional pathways do you think people who go on to become writers take into the industry? Do you think that, you know, I'm thinking with regards to education, the explosion in like screenwriting degree courses, for example, or writing courses, and perhaps an expectation that amongst people going to university for the first time, that like getting a degree on those kind of courses is in itself the ticket to becoming a writer, becoming a professional writer. So in your experience, what kind of pathways have you seen people take into getting those jobs? Is it as simple as applying for script editor jobs on, you know, a jobs website, or is it, you know, who you know, or, you know, how has it been from your point of view?
Yeah. Okay. So there's no easy answer to this question. There's no magic pathway. And as you say, you know, opportunities like the Channel 4 course or the BBC Writers' Room are the sort of visual entry pathways, and because they are you know, visible and anyone can enter, they're absurdly oversubscribed. So however good you are, your chances of getting onto Channel 4 course or BBC Writers' Room are minuscule. So you have to think laterally, and you have to be smart about it, and you have to think about all the different ways you can help yourself, because however healthy the industry is, and I think it is in a really healthy place at the moment for new writers, it's always just ridiculously oversubscribed, and there are always far more people interested than there are opportunities, and you have to be realistic about that, and you have to be realistic about what a incredibly hard industry it is to break into, and not just break into, but then to sustain a career once you've broken into it, actually. So obviously, we talked earlier about screenwriting degrees and MAs, and I have mixed feelings about them. I think they can be really helpful to writers, just to get you to sit down and do a lot of writing and produce a lot of work and come out at the end of those courses with some work you're really proud of. On the other hand, they're really expensive a lot of the time, and that's a very expensive way of doing that. And you will never go into a meeting with the producer and they'll say to you, which university did you get your screenwriting degree at? Well, I'm exaggerating slightly because sometimes they may do that, but generally that is not important. What is important is the quality of your work, you know, and the important thing is to write really good spec scripts. But then when you've done that, or when you're doing that, one of the really hard things is then getting those scripts in front of the people who can be influential and helpful towards you. So as well as the craft side of the industry, you have to be really hot on the industry side of it, the sort of social, collaborative, contacts, networking side of it. And you have to learn to enjoy that. because most people, when you say the word networking, their hearts sink and they think of like standing in a crowded room, like forcing yourself upon people and being a pain in the bum. And it's not like that, 99% of the time. It's usually, it's just meeting your fellow screenwriters, giving each other help and advice, reading each other's work, sharing information that you have about the industry. Because the one thing is that if something is like publicly announced and out there on the internet, then too many people will know about it and your chances will be, quite greatly reduced. So you have to be smarter than that. You have to do those traditional routes as well. But you also have to sort of think about who you know, or who who's a friend of a friend of a friend, or a friend of your parents or whatever. Yeah, I mean, there's probably less nepotism in writing than there is in acting. But yeah, you have to use all the contacts that you can, and don't be ashamed or think that's a bad thing to do, because actually, in my experience, sort of being on the other side of the fence now, I spent a long time thinking, oh, who do I know that could help me in my career? And now that I'm doing what I'm doing, and I'm sort of in, relatively, I'm in sort of in the routine of running this course. I don't know how much longer I will run it for. I get asked quite a lot by people, what can I do to, get work, or can you give me advice? And I don't always say, oh yes, I'll give you an hour of my time or whatever, but it is flattering to be asked. And, I'm generally quite pleased to have that conversation with people and say, this is what you could do. So, with people on the Channel 4 course, I feel like I've invested in them, and it makes me look good if they do well. And it's obviously, the better they do, the more it looks like I've been doing my job well. So people, in my experience, actually quite like to be asked for advice or help or contact, as long as you go about it in the right way and are reasonably functional and courteous and sensitive about it. But you have to do everything, basically, because it is really hard to break into. And, the hard thing about writing is just the hours and hours and hours it takes to get your script good, and finding the right people who are going to help you get it good, and then finding the right people who can open doors for you and can give your script to the people who you want to read your script. So all of those are not things you will do and they will finish. They are ongoing things that will last your screenwriting career. And obviously an agent is a big part of that as well. But again, you need to think about when is the right time to approach an agent. When do you need an agent, and what can they do for you? And there's no point approaching agents before you're ready to do that. So again, the more people you talk to, the more you will find out. And it's just a question of finding those people and enjoying those conversations, and realizing that is just part of the ongoing process of becoming a writer and being a writer.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. So like, as I said earlier, traditionally, continuing drama series and sort of normal 9 o'clock drama series, when I started, those were the ways to get into the industry. And that is far less the case now. That there are still opportunities to be had on, those continuing drama series shows. But yeah, writers' rooms are much more the way in, or the proportion of that proportionally is a much bigger entry route into the industry than it used to be. Also, short films are a really good way in. And again, as I said at the beginning, when I started, we were doing everything by paper. We didn't even have emails then, and we didn't have the internet. Now you've got YouTube, Vimeo, whatever. You can make your own short films, put them online, and people will watch them. And from my point of view, I would rather watch a really great 10-minute film than read a 1-hour script, because it's easier and it's more entertaining, and you're looking at things. And so again, you all have the opportunities to write short films, and writing a really good short film is really difficult, and there are very few short films that really stand out. But if you write one that really stands out, it will open doors for you. And theatre is another really good way in, because obviously I mean, it's difficult to produce a play, obviously, and to organise that. But you know, traditionally on the Channel 4 course, we have taken almost as many people from their stage plays as we have from their screenplays, and most people who come on the course make that transition from stage writing to screenwriting quite effectively and quite easily. It's not always the case, but they are very different in some ways, but similar in a lot of ways. So I think it's just, you just have to think about it a lot, read as much as possible, read the books about screenwriting, look at the internet, look at the things like, you know, the BAFTA website, listen to podcasts like Script Notes podcast, think about all the different ways into the industry and all the areas of craft that you need to work on. And the more you give yourself over to that, the more likely you are to succeed, I would say.
Amazing. My final question was going to be like, what advice would you give to people watching this? But you've just given so much brilliant advice that I think that covers it.
Okay, yeah. I realize I've thrown a lot at you, and yeah, but I hope that was helpful.
100%. And yeah, as we've hit 3 o'clock, so we'll wrap it up there, I think. But Philip, thank you so much for your time. This has been really, really invaluable and really helpful, and I've really enjoyed it. Yeah, for anyone watching who is interested in submitting to the Channel 4 course, it's open until next Friday at 5 p.m. Right?
Absolutely, yeah. And can I just say, I would advise you to enter before next Friday, because we generally get a vast amount of scripts on the last day. And I have revamped my website, because in the last couple of years, the website has crashed on the last day, and we get a lot of very hysterical writers worried that their script hasn't got through. So I would advise you to like give yourself less of a hard time and submit before the Friday. But yeah. But if you do enter, thank you very much, and yeah, we look forward to reading your scripts, and thank you very much, Jasper. Yeah, thanks for asking me.
Excellent. Thanks very much, everyone, and have a good rest of your day and broadcast.
Thank you.